Hello, everyone. Hello, Robin. Hello, Susan. Thank you for this. At the beginning of the year, I had this intuition that regarding the individualities of Sophie Scholl and Greta Thunberg, that the latter is the current reincarnation of the same being, reincarnation of Sophie Scholl. And I have a friend who can see into the spiritual worlds and touch into an individual's karma to make connections with previous lives. And after telling her about this connection I sense between Sophie and Greta and the astrological connections that exist between their charts, including Sophie's death chart, she responded by telling me that this being has had several lives as some kind of social activist and had always died at a young age each time. There was more information about them, which she told me, which I'm not free to give out at this time. But I do realize that this research, to me, has a lot of moral implications to it. Now, I'm not going to state that my findings are definitely true, but there are astrological indications, and I just can't ignore it. And these I will share with you. But I'm not saying this is not an infallible work, but I ask you to consider everything with an open mind, without preconceptions. First, share information that has to be taken into consideration regarding reincarnation. And I'll also share a little biographical information about Sophie Scholl and Greta Thunberg for those who do not know who they are, before I share their charts and make a case for soul continuance. Besides the possibility of being just wrong, there are other things to consider. Because the processes of incarnation and reincarnation are not necessarily straightforward and can be simply explained as an individual person dying and then being reborn. First of all, from my perspective, I'm seeing the spirit as the individual and what that individual has transformed of their soul or mental emotional life, or their habitual and life forces, and to whatever degree their physical forces while here on Earth. Another thing to consider are that in the various traditions in spiritual literature, one can find stories of higher, more developed beings incorporated into human beings. And thus you have the ancient descriptions of certain personalities being 2/3 God and 1/3 human, or some other configuration. And these are, descriptions of higher beings incorporating their astral and etheric bodies into a human being, and not a full incarnation. There's also the ability of individuals to sacrificially share their etheric and astral bodies with another individual to help them with their own soul journey. And as we evolve, we can take part, along with other higher beings, in the decisions made between death and a new birth of what we must do in our next life. Because we as human beings, are all connected. And we may share our etheric or astral body with another individual for needed evolutionary purposes. Out of due diligence, I bring this up because I'm taking into consideration that this may be the case between Sophie and Greta. Conscientiously, I can only point out what I perceive through the indications of certain astrological indications, and not through a developed clairvoyance or a reported case by a reliable clairvoyant that's necessary for certainty on such matters. Though I know astrology can point the way and be correct in such matters. But I'm trying to be as clear as possible about my findings and reasonings in light of what I see as the moral and karmic consequences for, stating unequivocally that yet possibly erroneously that someone is the reincarnation of another, right? So there is what's called the Hermetic Law. Hold on, see what I can do here. Okay. Okay, there's another issue. Okay, this Hermetic Law. Okay, I must bring this up before going into the heart of the presentation. Around 200 BC, the writings of the Egyptian priest Patosiris to his king Nechepso, he relates the astrological teachings of Hermes. And these two composed astrological writings based on the teachings of Hermes, who lived a couple of centuries before them. And from this came what is known as the Hermetic Law or rule. And my issue is regarding what is based on these teachings of Hermes, known as the Hermetic Law, and the fact that certain astrologers insist that the sidereal positions are the only basis for accuracy. And I find that both have very valid findings, and that exactness of aspects or placements are amazing when I discover them. But when certain points in the equation are placed very closely in the sky or in the same sign, that's already amazing. And it gives me further cause for inquiry. So this first Hermetic rule for reincarnation and its inverse is that the zodiacal position of the moon at birth indicates the ascendant or descendant at the time of conception, and the zodiacal position of the moon at conception is indicated by the ascendant or descendant at birth. And I use this formula for figuring out my daughter's birth date 40 years ago, which I may report on at a later date. To continue though, the angular relationship between the Sun and Saturn at an individual's birth is the same or the complement of that which was at the time of death in the previous incarnation. And what this means is that the two angles, death chart and birth chart, the two angles equal 180 degrees. Modern research by Rudolf Steiner in the 20s was taken up by his contemporaries, Guenther Wachsmuth, Willi and Elizabeth Vrede. And then later on, who's living now is Robert Powell, who focused on sidereal positions when calculating Hermetic charts. But Powell does state that the geocentric and heliocentric planetary aspects need to be taken into account, as do the planetary positions. But he says in the sidereal zodiac only. A discussion delineating the reasons for using sidereal versus tropical calculations, though in my mind, would take a rather dense book to give it any justice. There is some interesting EA astrological work regarding reincarnated souls being done by Michael DeBaker, and who's published a book on the subject fairly recently too. And he's using the birth charts of both proposed incarnations, which primarily look at from what I understand, the moon, the lunar nodes, and their rulers, pointing back to a previous life, also indicated by reliable sources who I don't know about at this time. But anyway, as you will see, my research is based on what I've learned through practicing EA, along with what I've learned from the work of Rudolf Steiner and the above mentioned researchers. I use the birth charts of both individuals and the death chart of the prior individuality. And you see, the death chart gives a picture of an evolutionary moment in the individuality's soul journey, indicating what the person had or had not achieved in their life. And this is then reflected in the birth chart of the following life. As I previously cited Steiner before in other talks, generally there are two incarnations, one male, one female, during an astrological age of 2,160 years. However, There are individual karmic variations of this rhythm, of course. And these incarnations may remain as one gender, but from what I understand, not more than 7 times in succession. The shortest span supposedly is the shortest span between lives is a span of about 21 years, okay? And the time between Sophi's death and Greta's birth is 60 years, nearly 3 times the shortest length. At this point, I'll point out that this was a life that ended early, and there's a short duration between incarnations, and the fact that Sophi died so young makes it very plausible that there will be a similar countenance in the next incarnation. However, I have to keep in mind that both Sophi and Greta have, Germanic, Nordic genealogical roots. In Steiner's lecture, Life Between Death and Rebirth, given back in 1912, he makes the following statement. When a person passes through the gate of death, he dies under a certain constellation of stars. This constellation is significant for his further life of soul because it remains there as an imprint in his soul. There remains the endeavor to enter into the same constellation at a new birth, to do justice once again to the forces received at the moment of death. There's an interesting point that if one works out the constellation at death and compares it with the constellation of the later birth, one finds that it coincides to a high degree with the constellation of the former death. It must be remembered that the person is born at another spot on the earth that corresponds with this constellation. In fact, he is adapted to the cosmos, and thus a balance is established in the soul between the individual and the cosmic life. He also says that Kant once said very beautifully that there were 2 things that especially uplifted him: the starry heavens above him and the moral law within him. And this is a beautiful expression in that it is confirmed by occultism. Both are the same: the starry heavens above and what we bear as moral law within us. For as we grow out into the cosmic space between death and the new birth, we take the starry heavens into ourselves. And then in the soul, we bear as our moral attitude, a mirror image of the starry heavens. Here we touch upon one of the points where anthroposophy, Steiner's philosophy, can only develop into a feeling for the moral universal. What appears to be theory is immediately transformed into moral impulses of the soul. Here, the human being feels responsibility for his own being, for he realizes that between death and a new birth, the whole cosmos worked into his being and gathered together what he derived from the cosmos. He is responsible to the whole cosmos, for he actually bears the whole of the cosmos within him. So I'm placing emphasis on the word whole that he uses in this study. Specifically, I'm looking at the death chart of Sophi in relation to her birth chart, and then in relation to Greta's birth chart, seeing that Sophi was murdered at such a young age. The intentions for what that life were not fully carried out. And according to Steiner, those who have died at an early age have unused will forces that are carried over to a next life. So here's Sophi Scholl. And Sophi came into her life to learn objective lessons, objective awareness of herself, and to understand herself in a social context. And this includes, lessons of developing security within herself instead of deriving emotional security from any external factor. shown by, Pluto and Cancer in the 7th house. In her life, these lessons were at the beginning of a new evolutionary cycle. Her evolutionary intent was to be self-determined, learning to accept responsibility for her own actions, thus achieving emotional maturity and courage to establish and integrate her personal individuality and values in the context of society. Sophi was, individuated enough to recognize the karmic issues and situations in which she lived, and resolved to correct the situation in whatever ways necessary. Okay, I need to pause again. Okay, what Sophi brought with her from the past lives on, this an outgoing sense of self. And although she could be impulsive at times, she was generally methodical, practical, self-motivated, self-controlled, and secretive. And this shown by her Saturn in Virgo, 8th house, the waxing trine to the sun. Her intention for her will and purpose was developing to be expressed and communicated truthfully and openly, no matter what. South Node in Aries. In the 4th house. Mars in Gemini, 5th house. Sophi's mind and her ability to communicate was in service to her individual will and purpose. Mercury conjunct the Sun. In Taurus, 5th house. Her conscious will and voice, Mars, was focused on communicating through the written word, Gemini. She also brought into this life an evolutionary need to communicate her values in a personal way. Venus in Aries in the 3rd house, conjunct the South Node in Aries, 4th house. And all this was to fulfill her intent to bring justice and fairness into society. North Node in Libra, 10th house. New forms were built of cumulative effects of actions of past lives. And in this life of hers, of relating and expressing values by giving her all to fulfill her evolutionary intent by putting them into action in society. Venus in a waning novile aspect of Mars. And this manifested in the tensions and confrontations between herself and society, and in this case, Nazism. And this is Sophi's birth with the death chart on the outside. And as you can see, transiting Uranus and Saturn, Gemini, at the time of her death, are conjunct her natal Mars, showing that her will, Mars, was impeded, traumatized, cut short when communicating, expressing, Gemini, 5th house. Natal, also natal Eris, the goddess of discord, is conjunct to natal Hades within 17 minutes in Pisces. And the death Eris in Hades has moved into Aries, the same sign as her natal Chiron, Vesta, Venus, and South Node in the 3rd house. Her self-reliance, speech, and communication is that which got her into trouble in the first place, and she ended up being guillotined, Aries. The natal lunar South Node and its conjunction with Venus in Aries are closely followed by Eris, Hades, Chiron, and Vesta. And these are all within 28 degrees from the end of Pisces to the end of Aries, right? These all show experiences of a previous life or lives of deprivation, strife, suffering, and loneliness due to her commitment to certain ideals and values related to independence and to communicate. Now, the midpoint between her natal Eris and south node, okay, is between her natal Chiron and Vesta, indicating past life violations of her well-being and her intentions to help heal others through direct action, Aries. At birth, Hades was between Eris and Chiron, indicating suffering for her compassion and ideas. And at death, Hades was conjunct her natal Venus, showing suffering for her personal values. And Chiron and Hades and Aries can also indicate head wounds, or in this case, decapitation. Besides expressing opinions contrary to the Nazi program, her demise may have been indicated by the result of, having the result of her way of being, impulsive, her impulsive expression. It was her tossing, Aries, right, many pamphlets from a balcony overlooking a courtyard at her university. She was recognized by a Nazi janitor who turned her in. Now, keep in mind that at the time of death, transiting moon was in opposition to transiting Eris. And I'll come back to this, to Eris and Venus when we look at Greta's chart. And here I'll add that her natal Venus was waxing to natal Eris. And at death, Venus was waning to Eris. Transiting Ceres, the nurturing one, had built up forces through her life commitment to truth and seeing clearly, Vesta. Her personal conscious will for social ends, the transiting Mars in Capricorn, first house, flowed with her sense of self-definition and perseverance for the truth she had developed, trining her Saturn in Virgo in the 8th house. Now, which happens to be in trine to the natal sun in Taurus in the 5th house. And this is expressed in her words during the time she was being interrogated before her court case. I am now, as before, of the opinion that I did the best I could do for my nation. I therefore do not regret my conduct and will bear my consequences that result from my conduct. And then at her trial, after having her leg broken during a 17-hour interrogation, she responded to all the, fiery denunciations about her. She said, somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is also believed by many others. They just don't express themselves as we did. Her death chart amplifies these dynamics, see, because Venus was coming toward the end of its 3rd synodic cycle and was conjunct Sophi's natal Eris and Hades. And was coming up to her, and transiting Hades was coming up to her natal Venus. Transiting Eris was coming up to her natal Chiron. Transiting Vesta is once again conjunct Venus, and both are conjunct her natal Eris and Hades. Transiting Hades is conjunct natal Venus at the end of the natal lineup in her 3rd house. The south nodes in the 4th house. And transiting Venus came across the beginning of this 3rd house lineup in conjunction to natal Hades and Eris. These death chart positions of Venus and Hades in particular point out that she suffered and then was murdered for how she held her values. This is supported by the transiting Saturn conjunct Uranus, both sextile to transiting Pluto, and which squares the natal Uranus. Okay, which becomes focused on the transiting Uranus with Saturn conjuncting natal Mars, which of course is also square the natal Uranus. And this square contains the lineup of these above, these bodies I'm just talking about. And this indicates that her soul intentions for an individualized expression of will had come to a sudden traumatic end. She was 21 when she was beheaded. And once again, according to Steiner, those who die young have unused will forces which can be used in a subsequent life. Transiting lunar north node, conjunct Chiron, Leo, 8th house, is in trine relationship to the natal Venus south node. Okay. And this indicates the soul's intentions for self-expression and whatever degree of magnanimity, Leo, she developed in life, and is connected with her vulnerability and ability to look beyond personal realms, right? Chiron, in the house of death and transformation. This was harmoniously linked, okay, with the sense of values and self-worth. It's trine Venus. Sophi Scholl, her commitment to her values was a soul's spiritual commitment to cosmic ideals for which she was naturally willing to die for. She, as her last words to this, her cellmate, or one of her cellmates, Elsa Gebel, something like that, a cellmate, were recorded by this Walter Rumer, the chief of the Munich district court, where she was being tried, and who actually supervised her execution. So Greta had said to her, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day and I have to go. But what does my death matter if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action?" Now, I can go on about Sophie's chart in life, but I think I'll continue on to Greta and her chart, especially in relation to Sophie's death chart. Here's a picture of Greta Thunberg. And here is some more pictures of her. Here's her birth chart. Her birth time, this is kind of interesting. Her birth time is unknown, but some time ago, earlier this year, I found some quote from her mother telling that she was born at this time. It just so happened that it was about the same time as Sophie's birth. But since then, I've lost that source, and so I have to rely on. I mean, nobody else knows the source. And supposedly, it's just unrecorded. But so I'm using noon of this day. So, and I'm not considering the houses. Okay, just the signs. And Greta came into this life with a need and desire to know and understand this world, Pluto and Sagittarius. To logically order and understand the world, she understands herself, right? Thus gains security for herself. She has identified with what she learns of the world to the degree that she has identified with something greater than herself, and has made this her mission in life. And her Pluto opposition point, polarity point is in Gemini. So she's definitely involved in communication in this way. Having heard of climate change at the age of 8, she didn't understand why so little was being done about it. And this led her to actually be depressed. And this led her to, to stop eating and talking at age 11. She struggled with depression until she started her school strike program, years later, almost 4 years later. And when she started protesting every Friday, her parents let her do this. Her parents, didn't like her missing school, but they respected that she wanted to, make a stand. And her father said she can either sit at home and be really unhappy or protest and be happy. Greta skipped schools on Fridays, and then she sat in protest in front of the Swedish parliament. And she had a sign with her declaring school strike for climate. After a while, through social media, this sparked an international movement of millions of youth, then later joined by older people to protest. Greta and other youth throughout Europe continue to this day to pressure leaders and lawmakers to act on climate change. Early on, Greta was diagnosed as having Asperger's syndrome, OCD, and selective mutism. She has publicly shared her view on her own, having Asperger's, calling it her superpower. Yet her Asperger's way of monotone speech, her OCD tendencies, and social awkwardness has made her more of a target, really, of those with other contradictory political and financial agendas. Even certain conspiracy theorists mark her as a negative force in the world who is controlled by her parents and even by the deep state. So here we have birth chart along with Sophi's death chart. In March 2019, Greta was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. In September of 2019, she was speaker at the United Nations Climate Action Summit, where she lambasted the UN Secretary General, the world leaders there and lawmakers with very fiery words. You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. And yet I am one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. She said, we are in the beginning of a mass extinction. And all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? So in December of 2019, about 3 weeks before her 17th birthday, she was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year. And she's the youngest person yet to earn this honor. She has since taken a gap year between high school and university to continue campaigning and to visit Mexico, Canada, and South America to meet other climate activists and to see firsthand areas, right, most affected by the climate change. Her identifying with her mission has been increasingly made clear to genuinely be for the benefit for the whole world. Oops, wrong one. We can look at her life be a sacrifice for higher ideals, right? Neptune in Aquarius in trine to North Node in Gemini in service to her Pluto polarity point, Gemini, along with Mercury, okay, the ruler, in Capricorn, the South Node ruler, Jupiter, in Leo. Greta's personal values and self-esteem is intimately tied to her conscious will, Venus conjunct Mars, in a powerfully transformative way, Scorpio, on the very practical and steadfast stage. So in the birth chart, along with the death chart, we will find that the Sophi's Saturn, okay, conjuncting Greta's north node, natal north node. And if you remember, the Hermetic Law states that the angular relationship between Sun and Saturn at an individual's birth is the same or the complement. The two angles equal 180 degrees of that, which was at the time of the death in the previous incarnation. Now, at Sophi's death, the angle between Sun and Saturn was 91 degrees. For Greta, it is 161 degrees. Now, this isn't close enough, but notice that Sophi's death position of Saturn is conjunct Greta's natal north node. Now, the lunar nodal axis is the gateway, if you will, for incarnation, and the north node indicates the intentions for the present life. And I also have to point out that Sophi's natal moon at 21 degrees Gemini is in opposition to Greta's natal Pluto and conjunct to Hades and Saturn in Gemini. That which Sophi defined and dedicated in service in her thought and deed, natal Saturn in Virgo, square moon in Gemini, became Greta's sense of responsibility. On another note, Greta's need for structure, Asperger's, OCD, also shows itself in her constant reassessing of self and her willingness to take risks for her ideals. Saturn and both individualities are ruled by Mercury, as is the death chart Saturn, which is conjunct Greta's north node, indicating the continuance of a life of intentional and meaningful communication in walking one's talk. This is also influenced by the death chart Uranus, Uranus and Saturn, which was conjunct Sophi's natal Mars, indicate a sudden end to her will in life is conjunct Greta's north node, indicating past life, karmic memory, Saturn, of intentionally expressing thoughts, Sophi's fifth house Mars, infused into Greta's incarnation intentions through the death chart Saturn on her north node. This karmic memory includes the Mars in Gemini intentions of Sophi's last life. The ruler of Greta's north node, okay, Mercury, is conjunct her moon, which are in no nonsense Capricorn, and conjunct Eris. Interestingly, Sophi's natal 8th degree Virgo Jupiter is at the midpoint trigger point of squaring Greta's nodal axis. Sophi's strong desire to be of service to the world, which was her path for personal expansion, was cut short, and she was executed for it. And this becomes Greta's, skip step or missed opportunity because it squares to Greta's nodal axis. Now, Greta's Jupiter Leo down here shows that Greta took this skip step and expanded her personal heartfelt desire out into the wider, worldwide arena. Greta's Jupiter is flanked by Sophi's death Chiron North Node conjunction. And Pluto, all in Leo. And Greta's Jupiter is 1 degree of the midpoint between Sophie's Pluto and Chiron. And importantly, Sophie's death Jupiter opposes Greta's Sun. The inherent wisdom, right, Jupiter, that Sophie was not able to fully live out in her life is now bringing heartfelt, nurturing wisdom to her sense of purpose and being. Sophie's death Mars is conjunct to Greta's Sun, Vulcan and Moon, and is within minutes of being exact the midpoint between Greta's Sun and Moon. Sophie's will can be seen as being transformed to Greta's purpose of will and basic needs. Vulcan's presence shows in Greta's indomitable will, right, to break down old forms in order to forge the new. And being in Capricorn, along with the Sun and Moon, shows her ability to focus and work steadfastly towards her goal, which is social, Capricorn. Also, Sophie's natal 20th degree Taurus Sun is conjunct 8 degrees, Vulcan in Taurus, and Greta's Sun has a tighter conjunction, 3 degrees, with Vulcan in Capricorn. And how Sophie had intended to forge her will was ended prematurely and becomes a more focused purpose in Greta's chart. Sophie's death chart, Moon and Neptune, are conjunct Greta's Vesta at the midpoint, making a square to Greta's nodal axis. So in Greta's chart, Sophie's part of fortune by sign is at the square midpoint of Greta's nodal axis and closely square to Greta's Saturn. So all this accentuates her global awareness and sense of service. Sophie's death chart, Vulcan, conjunct the South Node, is conjunct Greta's natal Uranus, which is their ruler, right? The ascendant at the time of Sophie's death is within a degree of opposing Greta's natal Uranus. What Sophie had developed in her self-expression by the end of her life can now be personally expressed in strong, surprising, and unexpected ways that is focused on humanitarian ideals by Greta. Now, Greta's palace is also playing in this particular dynamic. Yeah. Palace points to her mental demeanor and creativity. And what she learns is quickly applied and is shown in her fight for her knowledge of social, political causes and her humanitarian ideals. Sophie's death chart, South Node, is conjunct Greta's palace, indicating what humanitarian thoughts and plans she had developed and integrated into herself is now an impulse for her imaginative social ideals and action that she gives personal expression to. Is shown by the palace conjunct Uranus in Aquarius. Other asteroids to pay attention to are the death chart, Eris, Ceres, and Hades. And in relation to Greta's natal Ceres and Eris. All, of course, are in Aries. Another indication in my mind that there is unfinished business. Sophie's natal Ceres is conjunct by her death Jupiter, which leads back to what is brought out by the death Jupiter, opposing Greta's natal Sun in Vulcan. in regard to Sophie's death moon opposing Eris, both positive and negative aspects of Eris in Sophie's experiences can be seen to be transformed into Greta's need for others to let her care for herself, Ceres in Aries, as she works for humanitarian reasons. Besides strife, discord, jealousy, and revenge, Eris also gives energy, resourcefulness, and the impetus for self-improvement. And Sophie's death Eris in opposition, Sophie's death moon and Neptune in Libra, okay, Greta's natal Vesta accentuates the focus on commitment and perseverance towards self-appointed goals. Now, Greta's quotes regarding change. Right here, right now is where we draw the line. The world is waking up and change is coming, whether you like it or not. And not giving up. You must take action. You must do the impossible, because giving up's never an option. About changing rules. We can't save the world by playing by the rules, because the rules have to be changed. Everything needs to change, and it has to start today. On speaking truth. I often talk to people who say, no, we have to be hopeful and to inspire each other. And we can't tell people too many negative things, but no, we have to tell it like it is. Because if there are no positive things to tell, then what should we do? Should we spread false hope? We can't do that. We have to tell the truth, right? So then we have quotes from by both Sophie and Greta. Sophie said that since the conquest of Poland, 300,000 Jews have been murdered, a crime against human dignity. Germans encourage fascist criminals if no chord within them cries out at the sight of such deeds. An end in terror is preferable to terror without end. And Greta says something along the same lines. My message is that we'll be watching you. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. Yet I am one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. So both of these have very humanitarian world views as part of their soul life here. In conclusion, I want to give recognition to Rudolf Steiner, who saw it as his particular task to introduce detailed scientific knowledge of reincarnation and karma to the West. His intentions were to help others have a deepened understanding and experience of the reality of successive lives on Earth, which form the basis for true spiritual knowledge of the relationship of human beings and the cosmos. And he had very developed faculties to see and understand the workings in the cosmos from which his works were given. So I hope that I've been able to contribute to this in some small way. I have a list here of some works by Steiner, okay, and the list continues by others dealing with reincarnation and the life between death and rebirth. So these are specifically by Steiner, and these are from other people that he was influenced by. To end this study, I first want to thank Susan and Robin for making these presentations possible, and to thank you to everyone for listening in. And I especially give a very special thank you to Sophie Scholl and Greta or their inspirational lives. If you have any comments or questions, please add them below on YouTube, or email me at michael@midnightpoint.com. So thank you very much for listening, and we can end this program now, unless there are any questions from anybody.
Well, thank you, Michael. That was fascinating.
Yes, it was.
I'm just blown away. I mean, the physical, even the physical
Appearance
of the two of them is, to me, is similar. And then, you know, all the astrology that goes, you know, that overlaps, especially, I mean, even though I don't know what your source said about what her birth time was, although you used the noon chart, the moon in that chart, the connection with the Mars, you know, right on top of it, and it was, I mean, was just incredible.
Yeah. Well, the source that I had originally, supposedly from her mother's words, and I just lost it, so I couldn't find it again. So, but it was the same, almost the same time as Sophie's birth time, 11 p.m. So
what context was she using?
Yeah, which is, you know, but I can't prove it.
What context was she using when she talked about her birth time?
What? I'm sorry?
What context was she referring to when she was speaking about her birth time?
She's just talking about her life, you know, when Greta was younger, and just the you know, some of the trials that they're having with you know, being Asperger's and OCD, and then when she wasn't eating and things like that.
Right.
So interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah, that's why I find it to be so.
Well, thank you. Unless anybody has any other questions or comments, if you have any other comments to wrap up, go ahead. Otherwise, we can just end, and we can, if you will send me all those references, I'll add them in the description of the video so people can access them.
Oh, okay. Besides what's on the slides, I mean, just send that to you via
Yeah, just
email?
send it to me.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
you can post
Okay.
them, and then people can click on those.
Okay, very good.
Great.
Well,
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, take care.
Yes.